Hello, everyone. I am Carrie Frederick-Frost, and I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm the chair of the St. Phoebe Center, and I'm also the author of this book, Church of Our Granddaughters. I'm here at the invitation of my St. Phoebe Center colleagues who chose this book to begin what will hopefully be an ongoing project of reading books together regarding women and the Orthodox Church on deaconesses and other issues to enrich our spiritual lives. Let me tell you more about myself to start with. I am a lifelong Orthodox Christian. I grew up in the Carpatho-Russian Church. I felt called over time to be a scholar of the church, to be a theologian, and to be a teacher because I deeply love our faith. Now I teach religion at Western Washington University in Washington State. I occasionally teach theology at Orthodox seminaries, and I also write theological works for the audience of the church, such as Church of Our Granddaughters. My experience of this book was not that it wrote itself. I wouldn't say that. It wasn't particularly easy to write, but I felt like I had to write it. I felt compelled to write it because I love my church. And I felt that the issues laid out in the book were not being comprehensively addressed elsewhere. I felt that one book on women in the Orthodox Church that clearly laid out the situation was needed. So I felt compelled to write it, and I felt it was important to put the big picture of women in the Orthodox Church today. But this does not mean I understand the book to be the final word on women and the church. I've been asked about the specific hopes that I had for the book and how I hoped it would be received or what it might achieve. And really, my main hope was that it would generate conversation and that we could talk about these things and that more voices, in addition to my own, would join and carry on this conversation. In no way do I see my own voice as definitive or final. So you can imagine just how delightful it is to know that this book will be the subject of discussion over the course of the summer. Thank you, all of you who are participating and organizing, for continuing the conversation about women and the Orthodox Church together. So my mandate for today is to provide an introduction to the first chapter of Church of Our Granddaughters. And I want to start off by saying that we, like the early Christians, like Christians from any point in history, we live in time, and our own time has its own questions about what it means to be human. Today, we have all kinds of questions about artificial intelligence, transhumanism, sex differentiation, gender, etc. Now, these are not the questions of the ancient church. They are the questions of our own time. And so to answer or address these questions, we need to return to the doctrine of the church and return to our theological anthropology and use them as guidance. But we also need to know that we cannot ask these sources to say more than they have, and that new and different questions regarding these issues today are being asked and deserve to be addressed and answered. So this brings me to my work on sex differentiation, the chapter you read for today. Theological questions about sex differentiation are largely questions of our own time. And by this term, sex differentiation, which you'll hear me say, and you've seen in my book, I mean the expression of nearly all human beings as male and female that is represented by, but not limited to, biological and physical characteristics. The ancient church's understanding of the human person, again, must inform any Orthodox thought on sex differentiation, but rich and successful considerations of sex differentiation require, as I've said, a willingness to venture beyond the patristic thinkers. So I see a constructive theological approach that is both faithful to tradition and unapologetically creative, and that's what I have aimed to do here. So the ancient church, again, to which we naturally should look for reflection on this or any other topic, is primarily concerned with what it means to be a human person. But it does have a few things to say about sex differentiation. Some of the different sources from the ancient church are inconsistent and non-dogmatic. What I mean by that is that the Orthodox Church has never formulated dogma or a formal teaching concerning a theology of the sexes or a theology of gender, neither in the patristic era nor in our own time. Even so, there are two basic understandings of sex differentiation that come from the ancient church that ought to serve as a basis for our thinking about these things today. Number one, women are and men are equal in the incarnation, death, and resurrection. Gregory of Nazianzus wrote, "Did he, meaning Christ, die for the man, the woman also is saved by his death. They two," he says, "shall be one flesh, so let the one flesh have equal honor." In this very quick sample of patristic thinking, the equal honor and mutual significance of Jesus Christ is for both sexes, not just for men with women as an afterthought, for both. Number two, sex differentiation is not a category that belongs to God, but instead it belongs to humanity, as well as many other animals. As I said earlier, we need to look to our theological anthropology to answer these questions. And what we hear from the ancient church is that we are to understand God not through human experience, but instead seek to understand humans through what we know about God, knowing that humans are created for and through relationship with God. So any view or portrayal of God as sex differentiated is a problem because it overlays expressly human qualities, expressly created qualities onto God, who is beyond human qualities. So the ancient church gets us this far, but again, a constructive approach is required to address the concerns of today, such as, what is the theological significance of humanity's appearance in two sexes, which are expressed in culturally influenced genders? And what might this mean for women and men in the Orthodox Church today? This brings us to the conundrum. Humans are sex differentiated, God is not, and yet we are to somehow discern the meaning of human sex differentiation in light of God. How might we go about this? Today, I would say there are two general models in thinking about sex differentiation within contemporary Orthodox Christian thought that are seeking to address these questions. And I've given them names just to be able to talk about them: the Edenic and the eschatological. These models tend towards extremes and are unsatisfying. And so the two models that I see today, I name Edenic and eschatological, and I will explain both and then offer what I see to be a more constructive way of thinking about these things. The Edenic model derives its ideal of sex differentiation from the depictions and interpretations of the Garden of Eden in Genesis before the fall. It views man and woman as complementary and sex differentiation as part of God's original plan. So, in this thinking, the bifurcation of humans into two sexes is a God-given opportunity for humans to participate in reciprocal partnership and love, which is linked with marriage. Often, Edenic thinking involves an essentialist view of the sexes, the idea that male and female each have identifiable, different, and usually complementary characteristics that are innate to and definitive of each sex. Some expressions of Orthodox Edenic thinking offer a kind of different but equal quality, but articulations of Orthodox essentialism or Edenic thinking often involve the subordination of women to men based on a hierarchical understanding of humanity. And this thinking is used to justify limited roles and opportunities for women and continued ritual disparagement of women. So there are several problems with the Edenic model of sex differentiation. Its commitment to certain masculine traits as definitive of men and certain feminine traits as definitive of women is reductive, narrowing, And it limits the sexes at the expense of the full expression of each human person, which again, that was the focus of the ancient church's theological anthropology, what it means to be human. Furthermore, proponents of the Edenic rarely acknowledge that their proposed attributes for male and female are historically and socially conditioned. These thinkers, like all of us, are deeply influenced by gendered norms and ideals of their own time and place. In its enthusiasm for the essentialist qualities of the sexes, sometimes the Edenic model departs from the principle that sex differentiation cannot be projected back onto the Godhead. When essentialist thinking promotes certain innate traits of men in particular, shifting the emphasis from Christ's humanity to his maleness, the unfortunate implication is that the significance of the incarnation might be only for men. And let me just underscore that. It's not just an unfortunate implication, it's a heretical idea that the significance of the incarnation might only be for men. So the other trend, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum that I see today, is what I call the eschatological, meaning overly concerned with the eschaton meaning the final things. In this thinking, sex differentiation is primarily understood as overcome in the next life. The idea is that in the spiritual bodies we will experience in the general resurrection, sex differentiation will no longer be present. Sex differentiation is something ephemeral, present only in this life, to be transcended, overcome, and perhaps elided entirely in the next. Even with its focus on the end, eschatological views are nearly always informed by views of the beginning, the original creation of humans. These views are nearly the opposite to the Edenic model. Rather than seeing sex differentiation as definitive of creation and definitive of what it means to be human, the eschatological view is that sex differentiation is absent from or secondary to God's plan for humanity, and therefore it has no significance, no theological significance. This thinking is often linked with Gregory of Nyssa's ideas about a double creation, in which sex differentiation is established out of God's foreknowledge or anticipation of the fall. In double creation, sex differentiation exists as a secondary trait to allow humans to be fruitful and multiply after the fall. In this view, sometimes sex differentiation is understood to be present but meaningless in the garden and then manifest at the time of the fall. These are Gregory of Nyssa's garments of skin. Either way, sex differentiation is a condition of the fall in this view, and the upshot of eschatological thinking is the insignificance of sex differentiation. In its favor, in my evaluation, the eschatological model perceives sex differentiation as only concerning humans. It is not overlaid back onto our understanding of God. Yet, with its eagerness to perceive sex differentiation as insignificant comes a disproportionate interest in sexuality. It is not a stretch to connect this focus to the fact that many of the patristic thinkers who are cited to support an eschatological model today were unmarried, male, celibate, sometimes monastic, and largely of the opinion that the life of consecrated virginity or monasticism was superior to the life of raising a family. Negative associations with, or at best, ignorance of procreation, family, and women would naturally come in this context. Now, you may be able to tell, I am unsatisfied with both these models, both Edenic and eschatological, for many reasons. Both views are linked with contemporary stances regarding cultural issues, suggesting that confirmation bias may be at work. Edenic proponents may present the essentialism of sex differentiation as support for male-dominated families and society, as well as heterosexual relationships and marriage. Some Edenic thinkers use this model to justify limited roles of women in the Orthodox Church, including the male-only priesthood. On the other hand, proponents of the eschatological may point to the ephemerality of sex differentiation as support for placing no value on sex differentiation today, which potentially leaves the door open for an acceptance of homosexual relationships and genderless or gender fluid norms. The emphasis on the insignificance of sex differentiation also lends itself to Gnostic tendencies of our age, meaning an increasing wariness and denigration of the body at the expense of the full person with its intimate body-soul connection. Note that I am not expressing sanction or censure on the conclusions, the social conclusions of either model, but my concern is that their conclusions may be dictating their models, not the other way around. Another source of dissatisfaction is that the certainty claimed by both of these models. The Edenic claims to clearly understand the original God-created model of sex differentiation before the fall. The eschatological claims certainty around both the future and the past, asserting that sex differentiation is meaningless in the next life and was only a bug, not a feature of the original creation. Yet both beginnings and ends are ultimately unknowable to us. A final reason for dissatisfaction with these models is that they are both created exclusively by men. The Orthodox Church cannot successfully or effectively entertain questions of theological anthropology using only the thoughts and perceptions of men, almost all of them celibate and/or clerical. Perhaps not accidentally, both of these perspectives also distinctly benefit men. The Edenic perspective allows for men in the Orthodox Church to continue to subordinate women at worst, or narrowly circumscribe women in quasi-theological categories at best. The eschatological model benefits men because if sex differentiation doesn't ultimately really matter, then women's concerns, realities, and experiences can continue to be dismissed, diminished, or ignored. A constructive engagement with questions around sex differentiation today will require women being included in the conversation and a questioning of the consequences of our past models and assumptions. So now I offer a provisional and a constructive model of sex differentiation. I propose that rather than focusing on the beginning, Eden, or the end, eschaton, the middle, that we are living in now ought to shape our understanding of sex differentiation. Our middle is what I call an incarnational reality, meaning we are not defined exclusively by our beginnings or ends, but by our existence in light of the incarnation. We live in the middle, in between Eden and eschaton. This incarnational reality has consequences for the whole human person, sex differentiation included. When we look at our incarnational reality, an incarnational model of sex differentiation and gender becomes possible. In an incarnational model, sex differentiation is understood as having to do with humans, not the traits of God, and humans as expressly understood through the incarnation. The incarnational model reorients discussions of sex differentiation within the incarnation, which has been omitted largely from both the Edenic and the eschatological models. You didn't hear me even use the word incarnation in describing either of them. This is the most significant gap in both models, their focus on beginnings or ends to the exclusion of the cosmos changing events of the middle, the incarnation. In an incarnational model, questions of whether sex differentiation persists in the next life, or is part of the original ideal creation, or is a massive plan B hedging against the fall, all of which are unknowable, are secondary to our experience of being human in light of the incarnation, which is in many ways knowable. Viewing sex differentiation in light of the incarnation appreciates each person as sanctified by all the events of the incarnation, the birth, teaching, death, crucifixion, and resurrection of Christ. Through the incarnation, deification is open to every human to become Christ-like and commune with God in the kingdom. Thus, in the incarnational model, everyone is appreciated for their person and their gifts, all within the body of Christ. While an incarnational model rejects an essentialist quality to sex differentiation, it deeply values our experience of ourselves as humans, differentiated into two sexes. The emphasis on the middle, the incarnational reality, acknowledges that humans are sex differentiated and that this is meaningful in light of the incarnation, meaningful in our lived experiences, and meaningful to our own deification. Sex differentiation is real, but cannot be and does not need to be defined or demarcated. The incarnational model also avoids the trappings of biological reductionism that define and limit sex differentiation and human experience to solely physical attributes. Instead, there's a consideration of the full human that is possible, the body, the mind, and the spirit. Now, I freely acknowledge that my own thinking on an incarnational model for understanding sex differentiation may well be bound up with my own incarnational reality as a woman, and perhaps especially as a mother. Our tradition often cites the troika of crucifixion, death, and resurrection as foundational for our understanding of reality. I see the importance of adding in Jesus Christ's birth and life, and therefore more fully appreciating the implications of the incarnation for our own lives. I also acknowledge that I am not immune to confirmation bias. The goal of much of my work is improving the future for women in the Orthodox Church. Yet, in my thinking about the significance of sex differentiation, I've sought a pragmatic and constructive view that honors the principles of our theological anthropology, that is informed by the incarnation, and that includes the actual experience of being a woman or a man. Even though we understand ourselves to be equal in the incarnation, our lives tell us that we are not equivalent. The incarnational model, as I envision it, allows us to work with what we know, our own experience of being human, acknowledging that sex differentiation is directly relevant to our lives. It frees us to explore our own experience of sex differentiation with all the tools available to us, including new scientific knowledge of the sexes and ideas and theories around the construction of gender. It neither limits us to essentialist qualities of each sex, like the Edenic model, nor to cultural constructions of gender roles, but instead allows us to explore our own realities and experiences. It means we can ask what aspects of orthodoxy today are determined by cultural and social ideas of the sexes in comparison to an enduring incarnational understanding of these things. So in conclusion, sex differentiation in my model is not essentialist, but it is existentially significant. I'm just going to say that again. Sex differentiation is not essentialist, but it is existentially significant. It has significance for our existence. Sex differentiation is important because it has so much to do with our experiences of this life and thus our paths to deification. With an incarnational model, my proposal is that we will be best equipped to constructively understand and address questions of sex differentiation and gender today. Now, what might this mean for today? Of course, the rest of the book is about this question, is about if we think of an incarnational model and we honor women's incarnational realities in the church, we need to ask, in what ways do we or do we not integrate and welcome women's incarnational realities? So much of the book, the rest of the book, deals chapter by chapter with specific questions. But to sum up my introduction for today, I love the Orthodox Church, and I think we as a church can live out our service of mission and Christ-like love much more fully by integrating women into lay service of many kinds, as well as ordained service in the diaconate, and that will help the entire church return to its true mission. Thank you again. I appreciate your time and attention. I appreciate your conversation about my book, and I'm recording this in the Paschal season. So I will say Christ is risen in the spirit of Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who said it every day of the year. Thank you.